So in the last couple of chapters of the Tale of Despero, we learned that Despero was sentenced to going to the dungeon where the rats are, and he was turned in by his father, and his brother brought him to the trial, and Despero did nothing to defend himself, and he wound up fainting, and the stress of it all he just passed out, and that was the end. And now he's back awake, and we learned a little bit about the Threadbearer, who happens to also understand what Despero is going through. And we're going to see in chapter 12 what happens next. The sound of the drum changed again. The final tat disappeared, and it became nothing but boom. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, boom, boom. Lester used only his tail, bringing it down with great force and seriousness upon the drum. The Threadmaster retreated. The room full of mice fell silent, expectant, waiting, and as Despero stood before them, with the red thread around his neck, and the 14 members of the Mouse Council perched on the bricks above him, 2 blurry mice came forward. Burly mice came forward. Black pieces of cloth covered their heads. There were slits for their eyes. "We," said the bigger of the 2 mice, "will escort you to the dungeon." "Despero!" Antoinette called out. "Ah, my Despero!" Despero looked out into the crowd of mice and saw his mother. She was easy to spot. In honor of her youngest mouse being sent to the dungeon, she had put on a tremendous amount of makeup. Each of the hooded mice put a paw on Despero's shoulder. "It's time," they said, the one on the left, the first hood. Antoinette pushed her way through the crowd. "He is my son," she said. "I want to have my last words with him, my son." Despero looked at his mother. He concentrated on standing before her without trembling. He concentrated on not being a disappointment. "Please," said Antoinette, "what will happen to him? What will happen to my baby?" "Ma'am," said the first hood, his voice deep and slow, "you don't want to know." "I want to know, I want to know. He's my child. The child of my heart, the last of my mice babies." The hooded mice said nothing. "Tell me," said Antoinette. "The rats," said the first. "The rats," said the second. "Yes, yes, we, the rats. What of them?" "The rats will eat him," said the second hood. "Ah," said Antoinette, "mon Dieu." At the thought of being eaten by rats, Despero forgot how to be brave. He forgot about not being a disappointment. He felt himself heading into another faint, but his mother, who had an excellent sense of dramatic timing, beat him to it. She executed a beautiful, flawless swoon, landing right at Despero's feet. "Now you've done it," said the first hood. "Doesn't matter," said the second. "Step over her. We have a job to do. Nobody's mother is going to stop us." "To the dungeon! To the dungeon!" repeated the first hood, but his voice, so deep and certain a moment ago, now shook a tiny bit. He put a paw on Despero and tugged him forward, and the 2 hoods and Despero stepped over Antoinette. The crowd parted. The mice began to chant, "To the dungeon! To the dungeon! To the dungeon!" The drum beater continued, "Boom! Boom! 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 Boom!" and Despero was led away. At the last moment, Antoinette came out of her faint and shouted one word to her child. That word, dear reader, was adieu. Do you know what the definition of adieu means? Don't bother with your dictionary. I will tell you. Adieu is the French word for farewell. Farewell is not the word that you would like to hear from your mother as you are being led to the dungeon by 2 oversized mice in black hoods. Words that you would like to hear are, "Take me instead. I will go to the dungeon in my son's place." There is a great deal of comfort in those words. But, reader, there is no comfort in the word farewell, even if you say it in French. Farewell is a word that in any language is full of sorrow. It is a word that promises absolutely nothing. Chapter 13. Chapter 13. Together, the 3 mice traveled down, down, down. The thread around Despero's neck was tight. He felt as if it was choking him. He tugged at it with one paw. "Don't touch the thread," barked the second hood. "Yeah," echoed the first. "Don't touch the thread." They moved quickly, and whenever Despero slowed, one of the 2 hoods poked him in the shoulder and told him to keep moving. They went through holes in the wall and down golden stairs. They went past rooms with doors that were closed and rooms with doors that were flung wide. The three mice traveled across marble floors and under heavy velvet drapes. They moved through warm patches of sunlight and dark pools of shade. This, thought Despero, was the world he was leaving behind, the world that he knew and loved. And somewhere in it, the Princess P was laughing and smiling and clapping her hands to music, unaware of Despero's fate. That he would never be able to let the princess know what had become of him seemed suddenly unbearable to the mouse. Would it be possible for me to leave a last word with the princess? Despero asked. A word? Said the second one. You want to leave a word with a human? I want to tell her what's happened to me. Geez, said the first hood. He stopped and stamped upon the floor in frustration. Cripes, you can't learn, can you? The voice was terribly familiar to Despero. Furlough? What? Said the first hood, irritably. Despero shuddered. His own brother was delivering him to the dungeon. His heart stopped beating and he shrunk to a small, cold, disbelieving pebble. But then, just as quickly, it leapt alive again, beating with hope. Furlough, Despero said. He took one of his brother's paws in his own. Please let me go. Please, I'm your brother. Furlough rolled his eyes. He took his paw out of Despero's. No, he said. No way. Please, said Despero. No, said Furlough. Rules are rules. Reader, do you recall what the word perfidy? As our story progresses, perfidy becomes an ever more appropriate word, doesn't it? Perfidy was certainly the word that was in Despero's mind as the mice finally approached the narrow, steep stairs that led to the black hole of the dungeon. They stood, the three mice, two with hoods and one without, and contemplated the abyss before them. And Furlough stood up on his hind legs and placed a paw over his heart. For the good of Castle Mice, he announced to the darkness, we deliver this day to the dungeon a mouse in need of punishment. He is, according to the laws we have established, wearing the red thread of death. The red thread of death, repeated Despero in a small voice. Wearing the red thread of death was a terrible phrase. But the mouse didn't have long to consider its implications, because he was suddenly pushed from behind by the hooded mice. The push was a strong one, and it sent Despero flying down the stairs into the dungeon. As he tumbled whisker over tail through the darkness, there were only two words in his mind. One was perfidy, and the other was the word that he clung to. It was P. Perfidy P, perfidy P. These were the words that pinwheeled through Despero's mind, and his body descended into darkness. Chapter 14. Despero lay on his back at the bottom of the steps that touched the bones in his body one by one. They were all there, and amazingly, they were unbroken. He got to his feet and became aware of a terrible, foul, extremely insulting smell. The dungeon, reader, stank. It stank of despair and suffering and hopelessness, which is to say that the dungeon smelled of rats. And it was so dark. Despero had never before encountered darkness so awful, so all-encompassing. The darkness had a physical presence, as if it were a being of its own. The mouse held one small paw up in front of his whiskers. He could not see it. And he had the truly alarming thought that perhaps he, Despero Tilling, did not even exist. Oh my, he said out loud. His voice echoed in the smelly darkness. Perfidy, said Despero, just to hear his voice again, to assure himself he did exist. P, said Despero, and the name of his beloved was immediately swallowed up by the darkness. He shivered, he shook, he sneezed. His teeth chattered. He longed for his handkerchief. He grabbed hold of his tail. It took him a long, frightening moment to even locate his tail. So absolute was the darkness. To have something, anything to hold on to. He considered fainting. He deemed it the only reasonable response to the situation in which he found himself. But then he remembered the words of the Threadmaster: honor, courtesy, devotion, and bravery. I will be brave, thought Despero. I will try to be brave like a knight in shining armor. I will be brave for the Princess P. How best for him to be brave? He cleared his throat. He let go of his tail. He stood up straighter. Once upon a time, he said out loud to the darkness. He said these words because they were his best, most powerful words, and just saying them comforted him. Once upon a time, he said again, feeling a tiny bit braver, there was a knight, and he always wore armor of shining silver. Once upon a time, boomed a voice from the darkness, a knight in shining armor. What does a mouse know of such things? That voice, the loudest voice that Despero had ever heard, could only, he assumed, belong to the world's largest rat. Despero's small, overworked heart stopped beating, and for the second time that day, the mouse fainted. And this is our last chapter for the day, chapter 15. When Despero awoke, he was cupped in the large, callous hands of a human, and he was staring into the fire of one match, and beyond that match there was large, dark eyes looking directly at him. A mouse with a red thread, boomed the voice. Oh, yes, Gregory always knows the ways of the mice and the rats. Gregory knows, and Gregory has his own thread, marking them. See here, mouse? And the match was held to a candle, and the candle sputtered to life, and Despero saw that there was rope tied around the man's ankle. Here's the difference between us. Gregory's rope saves him, and your thread will be the death of you. The man blew the candle out, and darkness descended, and the man's hands closed more tightly around Despero, and Despero felt his heart start up a crazy rhythm of fear. Who are you? He whispered. The answer to that question, Mouse, is Gregory. You are talking to Gregory the jailer, who has been buried here, keeping watch over this dungeons for decades and centuries and for eons, for eternities. You are talking to Gregory the jailer, who, in the richest of ironies, is nothing but a prisoner here himself. Oh, said Despero. May I get down, Gregory? The mouse wants to know if Gregory the jailer will let him go? Listen to Gregory, Mouse. You do not want to be let go here. Here in this dungeon, you are the treacherous dark heart of the world, and if Gregory was to release you, the twisting and turning and the dead ends and the false doorways of this place would swallow you for all eternity. Only Gregory and the rats can find their way through this maze. The rats because they know, because the way of it mirrors their own dark hearts, and Gregory because the rope is forever tied to his ankle to guide him back to the beginning. Gregory would let you go, but you would only beg him to take you up again. The rats are coming for you, you see? They are? Listen, said Gregory, you can hear their tails dragging through the muck and filth. You can hear them filing their nails and teeth. They are coming for you. They are coming to take you apart piece by piece. Despero listened, and he was quite certain that he heard the nails and teeth of the rats, the sharp sound of things being made sharper still. They will strip you of all the fur from your flesh and all the flesh from your bones. When they are done with you, there will be nothing left except for the red thread and bones. Gregory has seen it many times, the tragic end of a mouse. But I need to live, said Despero. I can't die. You cannot die. Ah, that's lovely. He says he cannot die. Gregory closed his hand more tightly around Despero. And why would that be, Mouse? Why is it that you cannot die? Because I'm in love with somebody, and it is my duty to serve her. Love, said Gregory. Love, hark you. I will show you the twisted results of love. Another match was struck, and the candle was lit again, and Gregory held it up so that its flame illuminated the massive, towering, teetering pile of spoons and kettles and soup bowls. Look on that mouse, said Gregory. That's a mountain, a monument to the foolishness of love. What is it? Asked Despero. He stared at the great tower that reached up, up, up into the blackness. What it looks like. Spoons, bowls, kettles, all of them gathering here as hard evidence of the pain of loving a living thing. The king loved the queen, and when the queen died, this monstrosity, this junk heap, is the result of love. I don't understand, said Despero, and you will not understand until you lose what you love. But enough of love, said Gregory. He blew out the candle. We will talk instead about your life, and of how Gregory will save it, if you so desire. Why would you save me? Despero asked. Have you saved any of the other mice? And here is a picture of Gregory. Never, said Gregory, not one. Why would you save me then? Because you, Mouse, can tell Gregory a story. Stories are light. Light is precious in a world so dark. Begin at the beginning, tell Gregory a story, and make some light. And because Despero wanted so very much to live, he said, once upon a time. Yes, said Gregory happily. He raised his hand higher and higher still until Despero's whiskers brushed against his leathery, time-worn ear. Go on, Mouse, said Gregory. Tell Gregory a story. And it was in this way that Despero became the only mouse sent to the dungeon, whom the rats did not reduce to a pile of bones and just a piece of thread. It was this way that Despero was saved. Reader, if you don't mind, this is where we will leave our small mouse for now. In the dark dungeon, in the hand of an old jailer telling story to save himself. It is time for us to turn our attention elsewhere. Time for us, reader, to speak of rats, and of one rat in particular. And that is the end of Book 1. And now, the next time that we come together, we are going to read Chiaroscuro. And chiaroscuro means light and dark in another language. So you are going to see that next week. And you guys are going to complete the stuff that I have for you that will be shown under the video. And I hope you enjoyed.